The mind is so powerful. It can be a prison that strips us of our energy and our vitality, or it can be a platform through which we can find our creativity and our purpose and vitality.
Welcome to the Wisdom of the Body podcast. I'm your host, Heather Grzych. Here, we talk about the profound connection between mind, body, and spirit. Join me and other authors, wellness experts, and everyday individuals talk about the importance of listening to our bodies, trusting our guts, and living in deeper harmony with nature. So, whether you're seeking guidance on your wellness journey or simply looking for inspiration, you're in the right place. We're thrilled to be in the top 3% of podcasts globally. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and most other places where people listen to podcasts. You can follow by joining my email list at heathergrzych.com or by following me on Instagram at Heather Grzych. That's Heather, Grzych. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Today, I'm here with my guest, Reema Datta, the author of The Yogi's Way, Transform Your Mind, Health, and Reality. Datta first learned yoga and Ayurveda from her mother and grandmothers, as well as her grandfather, who wrote several books on Vedic philosophy. After receiving her master's from London School of Economics, wait a minute, Datta worked for the United Nations before leaving to study ancient yogic wisdom and practice. Since 2002, she has taught yoga and Ayurveda workshops, retreats, and trainings in 20 countries across 5 continents. Her students include Sting, Paul Simon, Edie Brickell, Zainab Zalbi, Sujata Baliga, and thousands of other practitioners globally. And I'm so excited to have you here with us today. Reema, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm going to give you like a fangirl right now because I haven't taught much yoga for like the last 5 years. I used to be a yoga teacher more years ago. And I used to play your songs in my yoga classes.
Really? How sweet. Nice. Did you have some favorites?
I like the Vande Guranam. That was my favorite. Yeah, I was actually listening to it last night and reflecting back on my time teaching. And yeah, that's really a beautiful one. And Mahamritam Jaya mantra. Yeah.
Those are some of my favorites too.
Yeah, but I was picking back up your work, you know, it's been a part of my life for a long time. So when New World Library reached out for the interview, I was like, yes, I want to interview her.
Thanks.
And then I was like, she doesn't know that I'm a fan.
Aw, that's awesome. And actually, I started teaching yoga in San Francisco, so kind of close to where you are.
Where did you teach here? Or
I taught at yoga. It's yoga.
Yeah.
Downtown. Larry Schultz.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because you're an Ashtangi. Are you an Ashtangi?
It was an Ashtanga-based practice.
Okay. Oh, yeah, he did the rocket, right? It was the rocket.
Yeah, so lots of fun variations. And yeah, that was first studio. I was there for about 18 months, teaching there full time.
Oh, my God. So you lived out here then?
Yeah, I lived there for a couple of years. This was back 2002 to 2004, around those years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just, you know, even when we were saying your name before we got started here today, I was saying like even your name sounds musical.
Oh.
You know, I know that you have this yoga teacher part of you, but also the musical part of you is so strong. And it's how, you know, I knew you as the musician before the author, you know, of your book, The Yogi's Way, which I'd love to talk with you about today.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you, I guess, had to convince somebody that yoga could change their life without even mentioning physical poses, how would you sell it to them?
Well, I would say that, yoga, on one level, it's a mindset. And if we have a particular mindset, we can persevere. And whatever we put our minds to, we can do. So as the ancient teachings help us cultivate a really strong, positive, resilient mindset, it changes our entire lives. There's one teaching in one of the Upanishads that I mentioned in the book, And basically, the gist of the teaching is that if you think you can, you will. And if you think you can't, you won't, which is part of, the practices of yoga. They get us to that mindset of I can, I am capable, I'm strong, I'm pure. I can move through the obstacles in front of me and persevere and make my dream a reality.
And we all need help with that, sometimes more than others. Sometimes certain phases of your life, even, it becomes extremely important to spend more energy on that. And you wrote about in the book the kleshas. And
Yeah.
we're going to throw some Sanskrit around today. And she's going to, I'm sure, do a really beautiful job explaining these terms. Some of them I'm literally like forgetting. And I teach yoga teacher trainings years ago. Remind us what a klesha is.
A klesha, the technical definition is a mind poison or a
Ooh.
destructive emotion. So those are really strong words, right? Destructive emotion, like a mind poison. But it points to the power of the mind, which is also like such a central teaching of the ancient yoga texts, that the mind is so powerful. It can be a prison that like strips us of our energy and our vitality, or it can be a platform through which we can find our creativity and our purpose and vitality. So the mind is so powerful. And kleshas, like, it's just to be very clear, the texts, they emphasize that no emotion is good or bad in and of itself. It's the way we experience the emotion, the way we express the emotion, that determines whether it becomes something healing and wholesome or something harmful and destructive. So kleshas are emotions and thought patterns that become destructive because we haven't processed them in a healthy way. So the major kleshas are attachment, anger, fear, especially of death, feelings of separation or isolation, and delusion, like mistaking illusion for reality. Those are the 5 major ones that are stated in the Yoga Sutras. And they're so central to the path because, as the Yoga Sutras also clarify, it's our kleshas that are like the biggest obstacles to spiritual growth and to really experiencing our full potential. So a big part of the path is, recognizing the kleshas that we have and then learning how to really face them and be with them and then work through them to ultimately be free of them.
And it's tricky because we're going through this as individuals, and then everyone around us is going through it as well. I mean, how do you recommend people identify when they're dealing with klesha?
Well, in the book, I have a practice. I called it the klesha trigger log. And every day, like at the end of the day, we take a moment to reflect, like, did I get triggered today? And what was the trigger and what happened? What emotion did I feel? How did I feel in my body, my mind? What physiological things did I experience when I was triggered? And we start to create a log. Like, we do this every day. And so we end up with this log of our triggers and our experiences. And then we start to get familiar with what are my biggest kleshas. And then that primes the mind, like we get prepared. So the next time something similar happens, instead of getting triggered and just reacting how we usually do, we're preparing ourselves to be able to pause and respond in a way that's helpful instead of harmful. So that's one really powerful way to get to know our kleshas.
Yeah. Do you think people typically have, when they're experiencing the kleshas, a physiological response? Or are there some people who might experience them, not even notice a physiological response?
I think it's both. I think often there's a physiological response, and it could be something subtle, like maybe the heartbeat gets a little faster, the face flushes, or the hands start to shake. So that's also dependent if the person notices those things, and how sensitive they are to noticing. I would say usually there is some physiological response. And then it's beautiful to keep these kinds of logs and to see over weeks how much more sensitive we become and how much more we start to notice. And that's powerful because then we can notice those physiological responses before. We might not even identify the trigger, but we're like, oh, my heart is starting to feel heavy in my chest. Like, something's going on. And it's like, oh, I'm being triggered. Like, let me remember to take some deep breaths and get centered before I react in a way that I regret.
Mhm. I love that you brought up the word sensitivity because I think it's like a blessing and a curse to be sensitive.
Mm. Hmm.
I guess in the work that you do you think it's beneficial to be more sensitive, as a musician, as a yogi, or other just, the work that you do in the world?
It's tricky. It can be hard to be sensitive, but we can turn it into a superpower for sure. And with yoga and Ayurveda, I think it's definitely such a positive thing because, ultimately it's our own awareness that becomes our teacher and our healer. Like in Ayurveda, they give us responsibility for noticing what are the little things and the big things that create imbalance in my life. And then once I notice that, then I can start to figure out, well, how do I rectify those imbalances? And that can be like trial and error. But at least I think it's beautiful how we're given that responsibility. Like, yeah, become sensitive, get to know what's going on in your mind and body when you eat certain things or when you exercise in a certain way or when you live in a certain climate, and like really get to know yourself on these levels. And the more your awareness refines, the more you become your own healer and teacher. So
Mm.
it's very empowering.
To be sensitive.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And then it helps us to even care for others better too, to understand other people, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, and being able to serve individuals better.
Yeah, it's certainly better than walking around and not knowing what's going on. And it's interesting, this idea of the self and knowing thyself. And I think the way you were writing in your book about the true self, and as a big theme in yoga for yogis, I know that when I went to Ayurveda school, I had studied yoga for a lot of years and I heard about Ayurveda through my yoga teachers, and it was like the promise of being able to identify my true self, to understand my true self, which feels like a huge thing in the beginning, right? How do we know when we're connecting with our true self?
Well, there's so many layers to the self, but the true self, when we say that, like in yoga terminology, I think it's often misunderstood. Like maybe think that the true self is like our personality or our gifts, our purpose. And that's one aspect of the self for sure. And it is a beautiful part of the path to get connected to that part of the self. But the true self, like the capital T, capital S, true self, that's something more deep than our personality and our gifts. Like that true self is pointing to our innermost being, which in yoga terminology is also called consciousness. So what the yogis found is that at our innermost being, that true self, is just like this vastness and silence and stillness. And the meaning of yoga is to actually yoke to that part of ourselves, to that dimension of ourselves. And another word for that is soul. It's like connection, yoking with our soul or our true self. And that's sweet because everyone's true self is the same. It is that vastness and silence and stillness. And it's like this unchanging dimension, which mystics and meditators all over the world, when you actually like connect with that space and can rest your mind there, all over the world spiritual people have found that that space is actually love. And so that's what we're learning to yoke with through the practices of yoga, is this dimension that's unchanging. It's like this underlying unchanging dimension that's boundless, infinite, and has that energy of love. And that it's so powerful to yoke to that dimension and to be able to anchor ourselves there, because consciousness or the true self, it's a source of energy and healing and insight. And that's really the ultimate purpose of the practices.
A couple things are coming up as you're talking, like one, the word chetana.
Okay.
When you say consciousness,
Hmm.
can you explain? Because I feel like I know a few different Sanskrit words that mean
Okay.
conscious.
Yeah.
How would you describe consciousness? That's a huge question. I feel like that's an
Oh,
unfair
that's
question.
okay. No, I love it. That's my favorite topic. Okay, so I'll share with you a teaching from like a lot of ancient Sanskrit texts. They compare the mind to the sea. And they'll say that the surfaces of the mind are just like the surfaces of the sea. There's big waves, there's small waves. The waves are moving in this direction and in that direction. Yes, it's just like constant change and constant movement. And there's an acknowledgement that that's the nature of the mind. The nature of the mind is to move. So it's almost just like accepting that. Like we don't have to fight that. We don't have to try to change that. The nature of the mind is to move, just like the surfaces of the sea. And then you imagine the very depths of the sea. And it's like this amazing vastness and silence and stillness. And that's consciousness. And to be able to touch that dimension, in meditation, we learn to be in that dimension for longer and longer periods of time as we practice more and more. Then it's like the mind doesn't just rest in consciousness. If we can do it for longer and longer amounts of time, we actually like start to restore and heal and strengthen. And if we can really, like, eventually we anchor ourselves in consciousness. And then, like, from that silence and that vastness, we navigate life's ups and downs, and we give our gifts, and we take care of our responsibilities, and we explore our interests, and we do everything while we're anchored in that vastness, which again is, you don't have to believe me, but I would hope that all the listeners meditate and see for themselves. If you can really rest your mind, your awareness there,
Mm,
you experience it as love.
mm,
But some more, just to a bridge to that experience is appreciating that consciousness just a little bit more, on the difference between the consciousness and the mind. So, I mentioned the mind is always changing. Consciousness is unchanging. It's always vast. It's always still. It's always there. It's
mm,
up to us whether we notice it or not, but it's always this underlying reality. And consciousness is spacious in the sense that there's room for everything. There's room for our anger, there's room for our anxiety, there's room for our love, there's room for confusion, there's room for our understanding, there's room for all of it. So it's very liberating because we don't have to judge or grasp to certain emotions. We don't have to resist certain emotions that are uncomfortable, or grasp to certain emotions that are pleasant. Like we can just really let the mind do its thing, So it's spacious, it's silent in the sense that it's not judging a moment as good or bad or right or wrong. Like the mind does that. The mind judges and
mm,
analyzes and resists and grasps. But consciousness itself, it just allows. It's like this open, welcoming presence.
mm,
And one of my favorite teachers, who I quote in the book, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, he says that, like, in the beginning, consciousness can seem kind of neutral, like this kind of indifferent space. But he says, like, as you practice and get to know this dimension, that neutrality, it blossoms into this all-pervading, all-encompassing love.
mm.
As I meditate, I find that to be true. So it's like being in union with consciousness, or being in that state of yoga. It's like you're anchored in that dimension of love.
Mm. Yeah, and it's interesting that you keep bringing up love because I'm wondering what role you think the heart plays in all of this from a physiological and energetic perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's powerful to be heart centered. I think science now is showing how much radiates from the heart. And even the text, they'll point to, like, at the very center of the heart, like the Chandogya Upanishad will say that, I forget exactly, but there's a lotus at the center of the heart. And then at the center of the lotus, it's like the seed of consciousness, you know? So that can be the beginning point of where we tap into it from the heart space. And then we start to notice that consciousness is actually everywhere, like in every cell of the body and everywhere in our surroundings. It's like the constant.
Mm.
But being heart centered is like a beautiful gateway. In the Chandogya Upanishad, they call it the land of no change. Other words or phrases for consciousness, but this would call it shunyata or emptiness. And it's interesting to me because Hindus will call it purna or fullness. And they're two sides of the same coin. But quantum physicists would call that space a field of pure potentiality or a field of infinite possibility. So that's also why it's powerful to connect with consciousness because the mind can get so limited, right? And then we tap into consciousness and it's like a reminder like, actually, I am pure potential. I am a field of possibility. And so is the world that I live in. And that's the underlying reality that we always want to stay connected to.
Yeah. And our minds are, I think anybody who's meditated here listening, you know that your mind does all kinds of weird things.
Yeah, for sure.
And it moves and it makes good decisions and bad decisions. And well, I don't know if there's other parts of you involved in decision making as well. But there seems like we have this higher mind and this lower mind. And you also write about that in the Yogi's Way. Which is the one that gets us into more trouble, the higher mind or the lower mind?
Definitely the lower mind. The lower mind is the part of the mind that it's like on autopilot. It's just very reactive. It's the conditioned mind. And it's like someone yells at me, I yell right back. It's like no thought, just reaction. And then the higher mind is a deeper part of ourselves where we're connected to a deeper understanding. That someone yells at me, I have a moment to breathe and pause and reflect that, oh, maybe this person is hurting. Maybe they're having a really hard day. Maybe I won't just scream back. I'll just like send them a wish to have a better day or something like that. It's just training ourselves to respond in a way that helps the situation rather than creating more pain. And that's a big part of yoga is to make that shift from the lower to the higher mind.
Mm. No one yells at you, do they?
No.
I
Example in my
was like, I can't imagine someone yelling at you. Do people yell at you? I'm going to beat them up. No, that's my lower mind. No.
I'm gonna wish them well.
Yeah. I like the way you explain that about the higher mind and the lower mind. It sounded to me like the lower mind is this more reflexive
Yeah.
mind.
It is. But the beautiful thing is, like when we're rooted in the higher mind, we can start training the lower mind to have different reactions. So if someone is harsh to me, and instead of being harsh back, I could, train my mind to send them a wish, like, may you heal, may you be happy. Because that's probably the way that they're going to stop doing hurtful things. That's part of some of the mind training techniques of the ancient yogic teachings.
Yeah. And I guess, do you think people without meditating
Hmm.
can identify those differences within them?
Yeah, it can even be like a inspiration to meditate, just recognizing those two parts of the mind. Yoga is such a humbling path. Like I'm sure we've all reacted in ways that we regret and that ends up causing more pain or deepening pain of whatever the situation was. And so there can be that inspiration like, wow, I can actually shift out of this. And there are practices that can help me shift to this higher mind and live from there and have less, what one of my teachers calls less regrettable episodes.
Yeah. Regret's painful.
Hmm.
I think it's one of the most painful things I've ever felt is regret.
Yeah, absolutely. Because once you react in a not so great way, you can't just like rewind like we want to, just go back and do it differently. But sometimes the pain is just caused, and often it can be repaired. But it would be nice to just avoid, those situations, which we can start to do and have less regrettable episodes. But another teaching that I love because this path is so humbling and the mind can go into judgment, like, oh my gosh, I just reacted so horribly, or looking at our past, I'm like, oh, I wish I had these teachings 10 years ago, because, it can kind of get harsh on ourselves. So
Mm.
there's this teaching of intelligent regret, which is just recognizing that we did our best in the moment, and we're just going to tell ourselves that now I can see this pattern, I can see how I've been reacting, and I'm going to do my best to not do it again. And then you just let go of the guilt and the shame and just like have this intelligent regret.
Yeah, it feels like there's some letting go that has to happen when we regret in order to stop. Well, because there can also be like a grieving and a grasping with regret. I have some clients that didn't have a baby, you
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
waited really long before they started trying to have a baby, or tried and it didn't happen. That's like a big thing because I had written a fertility book, and sometimes there is this regret that comes up for people of, I should have started earlier. I should have, and that's like with fertility, it's tricky because there's the biological clock. And yes, we have modern medicine and surrogates and egg donors and all kinds of interesting ways people make those things happen now to create new beings.
Yeah. Yeah.
But inside, there's a very difficult process a lot of people go through when they realize that they've really missed a chance on something, a form of regret. What would you say to a person like that?
To be with the grief, to really let yourself feel it, that's okay. Like, that's unfortunately part of being human. It's like we regret things, we wish we'd known certain things earlier, acted on certain things earlier, but, to give ourselves grace and practice forgiving ourselves, which is really hard. It's almost easier to forgive someone else when they've done something to us, but self forgiveness is difficult, but it's beautiful to be able to get to that point and to accept, the situation, and to also remember that field of possibility that's underlying. Like, maybe this is an opening to look at other options.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm super stuck on this idea of regret because I recently did something that I regretted. And
Yeah.
I was like surprised by how physically painful it was to feel regret.
Yeah. It just comes back to like forgiving the self and almost like rejoicing that something was learned. You can practice that intelligent regret and just make that firm decision not to do that thing again, do your best to not do the thing again. And I quote Maya Angelou in the book. She says, when you know better, do better. And just like reminding ourselves that in the moment we did do our best, but now I know better and I'm going to do my best to do better.
Yeah, it was really trippy too when I did the thing that I regretted,
Yeah.
and the person who was upset with me
Hmm.
came and said, they were upset. And then I was like, it was interesting how my inclination was to respond back and say, I'm suffering more than you because I'm beating myself up.
Oh, yeah.
I was totally beating myself. But I'm like, she doesn't need to know that. But I guess, yeah, it's surprising how much regret, is painful. And it's related to, I know you've written about a lot of great self reflection points in the book. And in addition to like some of the yamas and niyamas, like non attachment being, I think, because we're humans with bodies, that's a huge one, isn't it?
One of the biggest kleshas is attachment. And because if attachment doesn't get what it wants, we get angry and fearful and anxious. And so it can be the root of a lot of other kleshas. But it's beautiful to get in touch with what our attachments are. Like, that's always the first step to freedom, is just recognizing what the kleshas are. And in the book, I share that what was my biggest attachment that kind of birthed this book. But, when I was going through a separation from the father of my 3-year-old daughter, it was a very painful time for me. And part of the pain was because I was so attached to a mental image of what a family is supposed to look like. Like mother, father, child living together under one roof, and the father and I in a romantic relationship. I was so attached to that mental image that I was not in touch with that field of possibility that underlies everything, you know? Like my mind could almost just not even go there. Like he would talk about co-parenting and living in separate households, and I was like, what? Like I would just get angry and anxious and fearful and all of the other kleshas because of that huge attachment that I carried. But recognizing it is like so powerful. It's so empowering and liberating because if you can see it, then you can start to work through it, you know, and loosen the grip on that attachment and start to tap into that field of possibility.
Yeah, that's a huge thing to go through. So you're saying it was sort of like checking out of it? Is that what it was? Like that attachment was like so big that there was like a checking out, the thought of it even happening?
Yeah, it was hard to even hear like that possibility, like, hey, let's separate and co-parent.
Mhm.
Yeah, because it was, I think also because of my Indian background, I didn't grow up seeing families separate. It's not so common in amongst Indian communities.
Mm.
So that I just like it felt like a foreign concept that was hard for me to, I never imagined that would be like my reality, you know. So I think that's part of the reason my mind was so attached to that mental image.
Why do you think that is less common in Indian communities? I have a lot of Indian friends and a lot of Indian people in my life, having studied Ayurveda and working in the field. And I am fascinated with the cultural differences, right? Or uniquenesses of the Indian culture. Yeah. Why do you think that way so much? Or do you think it's every culture, perhaps even?
I don't know. I mean, I can more speak for Indian culture, and it's constantly changing, but definitely like now, you know, you do hear about divorces and separation. It's still not so common, but you hear about it. But I think, well, first of all, like marriage is such a huge deal in Indian culture. You bring in the astrologers, you bring in both sides of the family. It's just like a
Right.
huge deal.
Yeah.
Spend lots of money. And so it really feels like if all that's happening, like it's forever, you know?
Mm-hmm.
People stick together. And it's not so much like an individual is marrying an individual. It's really like two families are coming together. So it just feels like a really huge step. And so, with all that thought and preparation and everything that goes behind it, I think that's part of the reason that separation is less common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, things are changing, and I do hear about it a little more than when I was growing up. But that's, yeah, part of
Yeah. Yeah.
culture.
No, that makes sense to me. It's like you said, it's not just about the two individuals coming together. It's about like a whole system, basically, a whole
Yeah.
web, two
Mhm.
webs coming together.
Yeah.
It's a big deal for sure. Yeah. And theoretically, bonds that are harder to break, maybe because of that. Just like in looking at my Indian friends' marriages, it's like my son said to me, he goes,
Uh-huh.
my partner and I are not married. We never got married.
Okay.
My
Yeah.
son goes, have your parents ever met your parents?
Oh, oh my God. Good question.
And they never have.
Wow, really?
They never have. It was such a weird realization
Yeah.
when he asked that, because God, like, I don't know how old your kid is now, just him being 8, just the questions and the
Oh,
things
yeah.
that I'm
And
like, wow, I'm learning so much through him right now.
that's a great question. Yeah, my daughter's 13, so I I still get some of that.
Yeah, she made it through the divorce and everybody is
Yeah, we're all good. It's been we're actually really good at co-parenting, and it's been really great.
Yeah, it's super common, the co-parenting thing where I live, because it's also like Marin County, right?
Okay.
So,
Oh, yeah.
everybody's a little different animals out here in Marin. And I have a neighbor that the mom lives upstairs in one unit and the dad lives downstairs in the other unit, and they co-parent the kid even from
Oh,
like
wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, we do things a little strange out here in Marin, a little less traditionally, we'll say. It's an unexpected turn for today to talk about, different types of parenting relationships.
Right, right. Yeah.
And obviously, bringing up what you went through in that time of your life, going through a divorce, there are many of these big life changes that we go through in our lives, whether that's a divorce or whether that's changing a career or a
Right.
family situation changing or someone being born or someone dying, just major changes
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
that like these practices that you're talking about in your book are really helpful for people, especially in those moments.
Yeah. And even if you're not in those moments, I feel like yoga really, it's a preparation for the tough times. So even if
Mm,
life is pretty sweet and no big, huge things are happening, I'd still like practice because this is all a preparation for when things get tough, that we can be resilient and strong and grounded and centered.
yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, because if we're waiting to do these kinds of practices when things get tough, like it's just harder. It's harder to come back to center when something really tough happens in the moment. But if we have these practices in us, then we can like draw upon them in those tough moments.
It's also harder to do the practices when you're going through the difficult times, especially if you have no foundation.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I stressed like foundations in this book. It's like, let's really get grounded, rooted in the foundations because they're so powerful.
What do you think are the most important foundations people can focus on?
I offer four foundations in the book, but the first one was probably the most important, which is our motivation. Like to remember that our practice, like if we're just practicing for our own health, physical health, our own peace of mind, it's not really a strong foundation. Like it's not a strong motivation. But if we're practicing that, like, may I have peace of mind and a strong body so that I can have more energy and insight to give to the world. That's like a very different motivation, and that's really stressed in the ancient wisdom texts. A lot of what I wrote, I forgot myself, so I had to have reminders. But even that, it sounds so simple. But I remember actually when I was living in San Francisco and I just started teaching yoga, I was like, I drastically changed my life. Like, I used to work for the United Nations, lived in New York City, had a totally different life. And then I dropped everything and just dove into yoga full time. And I was really happy. Like I felt I was doing Ashtanga, like super strong in my body and clear in my mind. And I remember about a year after starting to teach yoga, I went to India to visit my grandfather. And he lived in a small village in central India. And he's also a yogi. And I called him Bapuji and I was like, Bapuji, I'm so happy. Like I changed my life. I quit my job. I'm teaching yoga full time. I feel so good. And he turned to me and he looked really upset.
Oh,
And he was like, Reema, this is not about you. Because I was just going on about how good I felt and my body and my mind and everything. I'm so
yeah.
strong. And he was like, this is not about you. Like, we do yoga for others. And he took his hands and he put one hand into the other. And he said, spirituality and service go hand in hand. Like, through yoga, we become personally fit and socially useful. Like, we do this for others. And I was like, oh, right. Even though I was teaching, I was still focused on myself.
Mm,
And I kind of forgot that larger
mhm,
motivation. And it does like change everything just to have that
mhm,
foundation. And in the ancient texts, they say that when you have that kind of foundation, then the universe works with you. Like you're just blessed and things
mm,
will, like you'll be blessed to have a practice, like to have a lifestyle where you can practice. Like you can get up in the
mhm,
morning and
mhm.
practice for 20 minutes or an hour. You'll have that blessing and you'll be supported. So that's really a big deal. to have that kind of big motivation. Let's generate energy so we have more to give. Let's get clear through our practices. Like, what was I born to give? Like, what's my particular purpose? Like, let these practices help me discover that purpose or update it or refine it,
Mhm.
nurture it so I can really give the gifts I was born to give.
And for you as an individual, when you left that work and you kind of switched your career,
Mhm.
what was that? I guess, why did you leave it? Why did you leave that? Were you like burned out and you're just like, I can't do this anymore?
I left because 9/11 happened.
Mm,
I was 25 at the time and had been working at the United Nations and was just in that world. I studied international affairs. And I realized, like, after 9/11, that it just took me back to the ancient yogic teachings that I grew up with.
mm,
With one of the themes of those teachings is that peace has to begin within.
mm,
And especially living in New York City and being surrounded by my observation was that most people are not carrying inner peace. There's just
mm,
a lot of stress and anxiety. And so I felt like passionate about world peace and I loved the field I was working in. And it was an honor to work at the United Nations. But I just felt this calling that, I grew up with these teachings that I feel like really work. Like if we really, commit to them, the awareness practices, the contemplations, the mental side of yoga, like we can cultivate inner peace. And that
mm,
is rare. Like yoga's helped so many people get a strong body and even a more clear mind, but that deep, unshakable kind of inner peace is something so
mm,
rare. And so I was like, let me dive into this and
mm,
cultivate that within myself and help others
mm.
too.
And then you like sing these songs and I play them in my yoga class and
That's awesome.
I love it. It's so cool. All right, final question here today. What does the wisdom of the body mean to you?
Oh, it's so alive. It's so here. Like may we all loosen our blocks so that the wisdom of the body can do its thing. When the moment you said that, I thought of my daughter, and I shared the story in the book that as soon as she was born and she was placed on me, she like crawled up my body and started to nurse. And that helped my uterus contract and bring it
Mm,
back to its normal size. It helped my bleeding. And that was like the intelligence that, that's the wisdom of the body. Like no one's whispered in my daughter's ears the second she was born and said, do this to help your mother. It's just like that wisdom of the body moved through her. And she did that and she helped me heal. And I feel like that wisdom is constantly moving through us. And I think like the more we relax, the more we let that wisdom do its thing. And we're so lucky to be born into these bodies. And it's like so much like we have to get out of our own way. And I learned that honestly through birthing too. I was like very determined to do a home birth and birth naturally. And I took 3 birthing courses because I didn't know how my body worked. And after all that, like the biggest thing I learned was just the most important thing to do is just relax and let the wisdom of your body, like your body knows what to do. Your body knows how to birth. My mind didn't know how to birth, but my body knew. And I just had to like relax and get out of the way and let it do its thing. And thank God I learned that because I did have a great home birth. And
mm,
but I think that's a metaphor for life, right? The more we relax, the more everything is better, the more the wisdom of our body works. And, we can appreciate everything around us because that wisdom is moving through everything in life.
that's super beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for being here today. And I've loved talking with you and would love for you to share with the audience how to look you up, how to find your work, read your book, listen to your music, all that.
Thank you. My website is reemayoga.com. It's Reema yoga. And that's also my Instagram, my social media. So Reema Yoga, you'll see information about the book. If you start reading the book, you'll see it's a 12-week course. Every chapter is 1 week. We spend 1 week on the practices in each chapter. And I'm doing a 12-week live course where we go through the book together. So that's actually starting March 16th. I'll do a couple of those. But if you'd like to join our online community and go through the book together, that's an option that's coming up.
That's an awesome option. Yeah, that's just going to be such a great series to do with people. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. I loved talking with you, and I love that I got to fangirl today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Amazing. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. Thanks for having me.
If you are embarking on a fertility journey and are ready to have your mind blown about what your body is really capable of and how it's impacted by the environment, then check out my book, The Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility. You can actually download the introduction to the book for free on my website at heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, Grzych.com. Read the intro for free and then buy the rest of this fertility enlightening book pretty much anywhere books are sold. Feeling like there's just not enough time in the day? You're not alone. Many of my clients, like Jessica, come to me overwhelmed, struggling and feeling the effects of aging. After just a few Ayurvedic sessions, Jessica was sleeping better, her digestion was regular, and she felt her vitality again. Ayurveda isn't about adding more to your plate. It's about creating balance so you can make time for what matters. Ready to reset your health and your life? Visit heathergrzych.com and book your consultation today. Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrzych.com. That's Heather, Grzych.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.